Our discussion today is going to start with our Director of Higher Ed Education Services, Steve Smith, and then Bryan Ashton will be joining us. Bryan is our Chief Strategy and Growth Officer at Trellis and Head of Trellis Strategies. So it looks like everyone has joined us. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to state them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll address them as the presentation goes along, probably closer to the end, but if there's a good point to take some questions, we'll do that. And we are recording this. We will be sharing the recording on our website with all who registered once the video is edited. All right, Steve, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. And I'm going to confirm that everyone can see the presentation. So welcome to our discussion today on the Trellis Some College No Credential Toolkit for re-enrolling students who have stopped out of school. Again, I'm Steve Smith, Director of Higher Education Services. Bryan Ashton will be here shortly. We're going to get started. So first of all, just a little bit about Trellis. Trellis Strategies and Trellis, we are a 40-year nonprofit. We do research into the adult learner and student success. What makes the adult learner successful in starting and staying in school? That is what we're all about. And what we're talking today about is a very big problem. How do you get this adult learner who stopped to come back and finish? Okay. A couple of other things we've done on this topic before, just on our website. You can go to trellisstrategies.org. You can look under our past events, and you can see prior work that we have done on this same topic. It is a very, very critical area of research and technical assistance for us. So please check out these other resources about the work that we have done. Now, Bryan Ashton, our Managing Director for Trellis Strategies, has joined us, and he's going to talk a little bit about the extensive research that we have done about this student who started school but didn't finish, and now why. So Bryan, welcome, and we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Steve, and thanks everybody for joining us here today. We're really excited to have the conversation about the Some College No Credential population, which is really core to our work at Trellis Strategies and how we view what we call the modern learner, which is learners who are engaging with post-secondary education in a nonlinear fashion and increasingly come to our campuses with persona other than student as a primary persona. What we know, and data on this is a little bit challenging to come by and break down because of definitions. But when we look at nationally, we see that 36% of undergraduates, according to NCES, do not finish their degree. When we add up sort of the number of individuals that have some college credit but no credential, the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center says that that's about 43 million Americans. And this varies from year to year as people re-engage with post-secondary education and as individuals leave post-secondary education. You'll see some different numbers out there. A lot of those have to do with some college no credential versus no degree, and also the data sources that we use vary for how we count them. We have seen, though, since 2020, some positive developments in terms of students re-enrolling across the country. And we've seen the number of individuals that have re-enrolled slightly increase, and the number of new stop-outs, or those that have paused their education, slightly decrease. But still, even with those increases, only about 2.7% of working-aged, some college no credential students re-enrolled for the 2023-2024 academic year, according to the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center. And so as we think about the number of people who are re-engaging, those numbers remain really, really low. And one of the reasons why we at Trellis feel that this is such an important population to talk through and to work through is because we see this as being core to the conversation around public trust in post-secondary education. When you have individuals who have started and stopped their education, some do that because they do find employment or they find other opportunities. But many of these individuals are leaving with past due balances or debt to the institution. They're leaving with Title IV federal student loan debt. and ultimately become, in many cases, detractors from post-secondary education. And so as we think about really this imperative to help support these learners, it's twofold. One, it's to help them to realize the promise of post-secondary education with that recognition that these pathways are not linear for many people. And so that starting and stopping includes the pause that they've taken from their degree or credential. But also that this is key to helping us to restore some of the public trust in post-secondary education when we think about, individuals being a few degrees of separation often from somebody who has started but not finished a degree or credential. At Trellis, we had the opportunity to do a survey on individuals who left college. And so this is a tough population to track down, but thanks to our institutional partners across the country, we received contact information for those with some college and no credential, and did outreach to really try to understand the reasons why they left their degree program or credential program. The top 5 reasons here that we see are reasons that we've seen replicated in research in other venues as well. But 35% of individuals indicated that they left because of personal financial issues. And so this is really kind of those micro day-to-day cash flow components. It's a lack of funds, it's bills or debt, food and housing insecurity. And when we think about this kind of financial notion, we often see this being the number one reason that students indicate why they left the degree or credential in exit surveys. We often talk about this as a chicken or egg component because oftentimes academic reasons create financial or hardships, especially when it relates to financial aid. And 25% of students indicated that they left because of costs of attendance or tuition issues. And this was things like insufficient financial aid, changes in their aid package or delivery, which oftentimes those are actually SAP or other academic challenges that students experience. But all told, finances come out as being one of the leading causes in this instrument, as well as why people do not continue their degree or credential. And one of the things that we like to highlight here is that these numbers are not often your direct costs. And so we do see students who run into financial holds and have past due balances related to their tuition and fees. But many cases, in that 35% indicating personal financial issues, these are things like being able to pay rent or pay for childcare or pay for other daily expenses, what we would consider to be those non-tuition or indirect costs that students are really experiencing that are creating a challenge. When we talk about the modern learner, we often talk about this idea of students are arriving at our campuses with personas other than student as their primary persona. And in higher education, we've traditionally really thought about students as students first. And when we've done assessment around things like student success programs, we've really viewed those through the lens of a student being a student first. We started to ask students questions like, are you a worker who goes to school or are you a student who works? And those kind of are telling from a persona perspective, with an increasing number of students telling us that they are students that they are workers who go to school instead of students that work. And this played out as well in our Stop Out or Some College No Credential survey, where we saw a good number, about 32% of students who indicated that they were leaving because of personal, kind of family issues, and that could be caregivers or other support. We also saw about 23%, I believe, of students that were indicating that work and employment challenges were a part of why they were leaving their education. So, Steve, if we can go back to that kind of aggregate slide with the 5 reasons. And, when we think about this, these are really kind of 27%, on the employment side. These are really persona challenges, right? And so if you are making a decision as a caregiver, between supporting a child or a parent who's dependent on you or your classes, most of the time that caregiving responsibility is going to win. If you need the hours to work to be able to meet your indirect costs, your employment schedules are going to win out over your course schedules. And so we've often kind of asked individuals to fit their life into education instead of education fitting into their life. And if we're really going to embrace these kind of alternative personas being primary personas for students, we need to flip that, right? Where we need students to be able to fit education into their life. The last reason here that we see, about a quarter of students indicated that there were health reasons that led to their departure, with mental health and stress being up there. And so as we think about sort of these conversations about mental health, that have been on college campuses across the country. We see these in the reasons why students are pausing their degree or credential. We also see these as being related to financial challenges. And so we'll have some more research coming out over the next few months that connect kind of mental health and student finances. And that will be a big part of kind of our conversations moving forward about how these are related challenges that students are experiencing, and that we need to kind of address those from a student success perspective in an integrated fashion. See if we can go to the next slide here. So when we asked students about tuition and financial aid issues, 61% of those who reported that they had tuition and financial aid issues said that the tuition was more than they could afford. 30% indicated that their financial aid packages were insufficient for the costs. And so, again, this is where we have some of these chicken and egg scenarios, especially with financial aid packages where there may be some losses of aid related to SAP or other issues. But these direct costs do pop up, especially for students, although, again, less than some of those indirect costs that we were seeing. In the next slide, we also asked students about those family and personal challenges, and 49% of respondents said that their family responsibilities had changed or were a challenge prior to stopping out. 58% experienced issues with their mental health, and 30% felt lonely or isolated, right? And so as we think about those who have indicated these challenges, we see these again as being kind of related issues, and that there isn't just one bucket that students select, but rather that there are multiple contributing issues to why individuals leave post-secondary education. The next slide, we'll take a look at academic challenges. 30% of individuals were placed on academic probation or suspended, and 29% indicated that their desired courses were not offered. And so these are two different ends of the academic challenge spectrum. One is not only a reason why students leave, but it's also a barrier to re-enrollment, these academic probation or suspension related activities. There's different kind of interventions, and we'll talk about that with the toolkit to help support these. The other 30% or so here that were not able to get into their desired courses are leaving for another reason. And back to that kind of concept of education needing to fit into life instead of life fitting into education. We really see strategic course scheduling and availability as being a key student retention mechanism, but also a student enrollment driver. And that this idea of creating course schedules that are adaptive to students' needs, not only in terms of making sure that those courses are offered, but that they're offered at times that fit with things like childcare and employment, are essential components to helping to support modern learners maintain their enrollment moving forward. Steve, next slide here. One of probably the most telling data points that we were able to collect from students who left, and probably not surprising to many of you that are on the webinar today. But we asked students about their communication and their future plans. And so 24% of students, or I should probably say here, only 24% of students indicated that they talked to an employee before departing the campus. And so we talk a lot about students kind of ghosting at college or university and leaving mid-semester or leaving at the end of a semester and not re-enrolling for future semesters. And we see that to be true in the data. So, when we think about this 24% of students who talked to an employee before departing, 3/4 of students did not. Some of that is an access challenge in terms of who to talk to. But some of it is also a institutional challenge in terms of reaching out to students and making sure that we're engaging with those students. And so as we'll talk about with the toolkit, things that we see here are equipping frontline faculty and staff to have some of these conversations, but also looking at those who were registered one term and not registered for the next term and making sure that we're reaching out and communicating to those students to try to see if they plan on registering, and if not, what their barriers are to registration are good ways to proactively try to engage those students before they depart the institution. We also asked students whether or not they planned on re-enrolling, and 28% of students plan to re-enroll at the institution that they had previously been enrolled at. And so about a fourth are looking to come back. And so as we think about the numbers that Steve put forward, 2.7%, kind of have re-enrolled through the National Student Clearinghouse data. 28% would like to re-enroll. We see a pretty big delta there. And we hypothesize, although we don't have the data on this, that number would be higher if we were to ask students if they planned to re-enroll at any institution, right? It may not have been the right institution that they departed, but that there is still an opportunity for those students to re-enroll at another institution of post-secondary education. So when we think about some of these challenges for re-entering, and what we hear from students is, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the scope of outreach that we've done. Oftentimes we hear from students that they don't understand what is required to re-enroll. And, we'll talk about this a little bit later, where we need clear pathways for students to re-enroll, just as we have them to enroll. And we spend a lot of time focused on that learner journey for them to come into the institution for the first time. But as a returning learner, whether it's credit at the institution that they're reapplying to or another institution, that pathway for coming back isn't always clear. The second piece is a lack of follow-up from the former institution. And so, as we think about it, actually, it's a good example of this right now. We just got through Black Friday and Cyber Monday and now Giving Tuesday, which means that all of your inboxes have likely received multiple emails from multiple organizations promoting different things. Individuals are used to getting that outreach. And so as we think about kind of this idea of nonlinear learning and lifelong learning for many individuals, that constant communication and engagement is really essential for students to feel as if they are welcome to come back to the institution. And so a couple things that we look at here. One is making sure that we have a cadence for outreach to these individuals. Two, that we are providing motivational messaging and new degree and credential opportunities. But three, that we're responsive when they do reach back out. And so when oftentimes we do these drip campaigns and we try to engage them, but we take days to get back to them when they call. And so we want to make sure that we are responsive to those who are actually re-engaging with us at an institution. The same is true, especially for those of you who are at community colleges or open access institutions. A good number of your non-matriculants will not show up in the National Student Clearinghouse data 12, 18 months later as having been enrolled somewhere. These are individuals who are interested in post-secondary education, but maybe the timing wasn't right. And these are really what we would consider kind of warm leads to re-engage, even if they haven't attended. And so that kind of follow-up can be both those with some college no credential, but also those who may have applied but not attended and are not showing up as attending any post-secondary education. Complex re-enrollment processes were notorious for this in higher education, and it goes with not being able to understand what is required to re-enroll. Multiple step processes, especially when individuals have been previously enrolled at an institution, can be challenging. One of my favorites that I see quite often is institutions asking for the transcript from the institution that the student was previously at and requiring that transcript to be retrieved from the registrar by the individual and then re-uploaded in another admissions portal. Things like that are kind of bureaucracy that we can take out of the process and try to streamline for the individual to re-enroll. And then finally, financial barriers. We've seen this a lot. It received a lot of attention during HERF with some of the past due balance work that was done to alleviate past due balances. But we see these financial barriers to re-enrollment. And then we also see these personal factors, which I really oftentimes quantify as more time poverty than anything else, where students are experiencing sort of a time challenge to fit courses into the life that they've been able to construct, but they can't move life, even though they know that they need to continue to pursue a degree or credential. So if we go to the next slide here, there's kind of 4 research-informed re-enrollment practices that we've been supporting here at Trellis, and we'll talk through these within the toolkit. The first is to address financial barriers. The second is to improve sort of those communication and outreach components and making sure that we're journey mapping for the individual learners who are returning, not just those who are coming to us for the first time. The third is to proactively recognize challenges. And so this population is not the quote unquote low hanging fruit that a lot of people talk about. There are real systemic challenges to re-engaging these students. There are real reasons why these students pause their education in the first place. And in order to recognize those challenges, we need to value student voices. And so, like I said, we've collected a lot of data on student voice that we'll be publishing here over the next few months, and that is informing of the toolkit that we will be releasing next week. But this work is important not only to alleviate some of those re-enrollment barriers, but also to make sure that the reason why the student paused their education doesn't happen again. And so when we think about things like academic preparedness, making sure that we have bridge and other programs developed, kind of to support students. When we think about financial barriers, making sure we have good payment plan flags and past due balance support and emergency aid, all of those pieces are there to help students re-enroll, to make sure that we don't have some of the repausing problems that we see with many students who do re-enroll. So finally here, I think on this next slide, we'll turn it over to Steve to walk through this toolkit. We're excited to release this on Monday of next week, and we'll be able to send this out here to folks after the webinar. But really, this is to help you plan as a campus to support individuals in their re-enrollment efforts. And so I'll now turn it back over to Steve to walk through sort of the toolkit and why the interventions and planning matter.
Thank you, Bryan. So we've seen from the information Bryan shared, the research on the challenges students who have started college but not finished. They have some credits but no credential. So they started, they didn't finish. And, now what are we going to do about that? How do we make a process that works for them? Well, so first of all, I just want to talk about the fact that doing something different than just waiting for them to come back does help. If you just wait for them to come back, most of them won't. On average, 2.7% of the students who started and stopped out will come back. That's just waiting for them to return. That's small. But if you put something into it, some intervention, some outreach, some thought, you're going to increase that number. It is still not all of them, but it's going to be bigger, and it could even go bigger than this. Our results, if you make the process even more robust. Our process was pretty simple. On behalf of 38 institutions over 5 semesters, we contacted 168,000 students and basically just said, your college wants you back, come on back, and just introduced that little bit of nudge. And guess what? You got over nearly 11,000 of them came back with just that nudge. What if you even go further than that and make the process friendly, make the advising comprehensive, all those things? What more can you do? And I think you can do a lot more. So that's why we created the toolkit, is to help deal with this issue, to help bridge that gap between the 28% who started school and said, yeah, I do want to come back, and the very small number who actually do. So in order to make this work, we need to find out, why did they leave us in the first place? We, Trellis, have done some national data on that, which Bryan shared, but you'll do some at your institution. We need to make a process that works for them to come back. We'll talk about that. And then we also need to be the right institution. Sometimes, we may need to say, this institution over there is the right institution. It's not us. And that's okay too. We'd rather have them finish at the right school, okay? So Bryan touched on this, and this is, pretty much true in all of our experience working with hundreds of schools. Almost every college has a well-defined process for recruiting freshmen, students who have no college and no degree. But students who have some college and no degree, transfers, or students who stopped out of your school or another school, this is where many schools struggle, because the process is not as linear as it is with many freshman type enrollments. There are things that have to be resolved, and there often is not real intentionality around it. So we need to work on that as an industry and make the re-enrollment process, the coming back process, just as robust, just as friendly, just as rational as the new freshman process. Okay. So that's why we have the toolkit. It's going to be a guide to help you, say, I'm not sure how to start. Well, we're going to provide a checklist, advice, information, a framework that you can use. Okay. 7 steps. It's very logical. We're going to go through these, and I'll tell you more about these in a minute. But step 1, why did they leave us? You need to know that we shared information nationally, and your institution probably shares many of the same reasons, but you need to find out specific to your institution, what are the reasons. Do the checklist, audit your process, audit if we got all our ducks in a row on this. Then identify who left us. Design a process that's friendly for them to follow, reach out to them, invite them back, and then when they re-enroll, continue to provide the support because, as Bryan mentioned, the likelihood of them stopping again is high or can be high. And then assess, is it working, what's not working, and fix it, okay? So we've shared these information already. A lot of students, very few of them come back. Let's get them, there are some improvements, but most students who leave don't come back. So let's deal with that. All right. In the beginning of the toolkit, we're going to share some of the national data. Now you're going to want your own data on this. We'll talk about that later, but look at just the national information because a lot of this is going to apply to you as well. Why do they leave? What are their perceptions? Do they want to re-enroll? That kind of information. Very important, before you even start anything, make sure that you involve everybody who has a stake in this. Again, this is not one of these things where we're going to have one person in the admissions office dealing with this, because when you're dealing with some college no credential, or also even transfer students, because they often behave in similar ways, they're going to come in with more complexity. They've got prior credits that need to be dealt with. They need to know where they stopped and where they need to start again. Perhaps they have a academic issue that needs to be dealt with. They have financial aid or student account issues or library issues or parking issues or dorm issues or whatever the issue is. Make sure all of those officers are at the table understanding what we're doing in the re-enrollment process and ready to provide a solution for what's holding that student back in their area of the institution. Okay, so involve them all. All right. So now you've got your committees, you've got your people involved. Let's get to work. Step one, why did they leave you? Okay, so you need to understand, really, in order to talk to them, you need to kind of understand where they're coming from. How do you get that? Well, obviously, we provided some national data, which is going to be useful as a starting point, but you're going to want your own information. Look at your student information system. Do some simple analysis. Where in the program are they leaving? What kind of student is leaving? Is there certain programs, certain types of students? What's their data? Do a little bit of information on that. Exit surveys. Look at this. If you have a student who, if you get information from them when they do a survey, or perhaps you will do the re-engagement, which is the stop-out survey that Trellis does for institutions. Find out, what are they saying while they left? Talk to your faculty. What are you observing? And of course, look at the National Student Clearinghouse to see, are they just going somewhere else? Add all that up and develop, this is the picture. This is the persona of who is leaving us. Now we know, okay? Do the checklist. The checklist is an audit. It allows you to go through all of your institution. Do we have this in place? Do we have this in place? Do we have this in place? So that you can say, and we make it real easy, just allow you to ask the questions with your whole committee in place. Do we have the steps in place that are going to make a re-enrollment process work? So do the checklist. Now, here's a copy of the checklist. You can see it's very organized. It's by types of processes, for example, assessment, student-friendly procedures, further, avoiding recidivism, all of the things. We're going to just break it down and let you go through and audit yourself. Okay. Step 3. Now it's time to invite them back, but we need to figure out who they are. So we know why they left. Let's go through our database and determine who are we going to invite back. And they're not all going to be the same. It's not just going to be a big list and we're just going to blast out there and say, come on back, because some of them will have issue A, some will have issue B, some will have issue C. Be ready for these issues, which I'll talk about in a minute. You got to be ready. Some of them had left with no problems at all. Maybe they just left. But then some are going to have financial, personal, academic, all of the above. Identify and put those students in, know who they are, put them in buckets so that when they start to say, yeah, I want to come back, you're ready. Okay. That's where step 4, you're ready. You're going to have a workflow. They have to have a path to follow. Think about when new freshmen apply, you have a real path. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. Do you have that for your re-enrolling student? Maybe, maybe not, but you need to have a clear path. Step 1, you do this. Step 2, step 3. Make sure the student can follow that path so that if you do invite them back, they can come back. You want them to be able to follow the path through so that they can get, if they have a hold here, it's able to be resolved. We know how it's going to be resolved. We know what the path is. If they have academic credit, we know how to do it. Never, never assume, and this is something that we do all the time, assume that the student, they've been here before, they know how it works. They do not know how it works. They don't. They were here before under a different context. Maybe the first time they came, they were a new freshman. They followed that path. This is a different path now. There's a new reality. They don't know how it works. You got to lead them through it and not make them figure it out for themselves. And if you see them stopped, they've made it step 1, 2, and 3, and they're stopped on step 4, you got to intervene and say, hey, we need to move you to step 5. Don't wait for them to move to step 5. You got to reach out and move them to step 5. Very, very important. Okay. Now it's time to do the outreach. So we've identified why they stopped out. We identified who's eligible to come back. We've designed a process that's friendly. Now we're going to start contacting them and say it's time to come back. Let's get them in a number of ways: text, phone call, email, sometimes even print mail, sometimes all of the above. A lot of times, in this world, an expert recently told me this: people will answer the phone more when you text them first and say, I'm going to call you. So for example, get them on multiple channels so that you can get in touch with them and say, hey, it's time to come back. We're ready for you. Reduce the friction of re-enrollment, designing ways to evaluate their existing transcripts and prior learning quickly. In other words, when they say yes, be ready. Oh, you left with 20 credits. Great. You're doing the associate's degree. That's, you only have 40 credits to go. Here's where you're going to start. Here's your next step. Here's your next class. Be ready for them with a yes at every step that needs to be resolved. The one thing you cannot do is you cannot say, come on back. And then when they say yes, say, oh, we're sorry, you can't come back because you have this hold, that hold, and that hold. Every student who says they want to come back has to be able to be fixed. It doesn't mean that they're off the hook, that it's just a walk in the door. Maybe they have to do something. Maybe they have to pay something. But you got to be ready to deal with their issue productively with the real chance that they're going to be resolving it and getting back into class. You got to be ready for it, and you got to be ready to make it productive and easy for them to follow. Okay. And then finally, when they actually do re-enroll, keep an eye on them, because some of the same problems Bryan talked about in the beginning of the discussion, mental health, financial, job conflicts, family issues, financial aid, all of these things, maybe miraculously they went away, but they probably didn't. These same issues are still going to be haunting the student and could still lead to them leaving. So we need to make sure we're keeping close tabs, checking in on them. Are you still okay? Is it still going right? Are you still making progress? Do you have any challenges that we can help you figure out or brainstorm or apply resources to? Watch them carefully, because they left before, they could leave again with a similar issue. Okay. And then finally, like always, do a year of this, do a semester, look at what works, what doesn't, fix what didn't work, or double down on what did work, but assess it so that you know what's working and what isn't working. Talk to everybody. Talk to that committee that we started in the beginning of everybody and say, hey, is it working in your area? Yeah, great. Is it working in your area? Not yet. Okay. Really do that assessment and make sure that you continuous improvement. That is key. All right. So we're going to be taking questions here in a moment, getting your thoughts, getting your feedback. But let me just tell you a couple of things. First of all, Bryan mentioned Monday, this toolkit will be available on our website, trellisstrategies.org. Download it. It's a PDF form. You can use it right away to assess your own process. Engage us. If you need assistance with some of the research we're talking about, analyzing your student, who's leaving, researching them through the surveys, all of that, Trellis does all that work. And if you need help working through the toolkit, we want some help understanding and looking at our process from your vantage point. Contact us about that too. We're here to help. Okay, so let me just leave on what's next here, and then we'll turn it now to see Andrea. Do we have any comments or questions from our participants?
Not yet.
Okay, use the chat or Q&A function, or just raise your hand, and we'll take that question, or give us your own feedback and your own experience of maybe what you have experienced with your institution and students with some college no credential in the re-enrollment process.
One of the things, Steve, that I would just mention while we're waiting for anything to come inbound, we are in the process right now of launching a pilot in early 2026 that focuses on outreach to individuals with some college no credential that is agnostic to the institution that they were previously enrolled at. And so a lot of these initiatives focus on re-enrolling students at the institution that they were previously at. As we mentioned, we think there's a lot of opportunity to enroll students across different institutions, and that if we can work together as regional, in particular regional consortiums, to re-enroll students, that there is a lot of upside to doing that. The second part of that is that the outreach as a part of that is targeted to the individuals. And so a lot of the outreach that we've done has been more general motivation about coming back to school. Our belief is that if we can source, aptitude and skills that students have based on transcript data and other components, translate that into degrees or credentials that are aligned with in-demand fields where there are workforce opportunities, and then source sort of student motivation through that process to understand, what's important to them: time to degree, earnings, employment stability, employment predictability of hours. If we can use that to then source, we can then curate pathways for individuals to come back. Because I think a lot of times when we see re-enrollment initiatives, we have kind of two separate components. One is a paralysis of, hey, come back, here's 130 different degree or credential programs that you could potentially enroll in. And then oftentimes the kind of counter to that, to assist with that paralysis, is we say, hey, come back, but let's enroll in these general studies degree programs that may or may not have sort of the workforce outcomes on the back end. And so if we're able to curate, again, based on kind of aptitude, skills, and interest, a handful of programs for students to come back, it makes that conversation with a student a lot easier on the re-engagement side to get them back into the institution.
I do have a quick poll that I just launched. It would be great to see those of you that tuned in today, if you're working on this or have an interest. Awesome. Okay. Some people are working on this. Some people have an interest in tackling this.
Very good. So most of you have some process that you're working on. Just a couple of additional anecdotes. We have seen institutions that have really put some devoted staff, devoted process into this population of students with some college no credential, and seeing very good results. I sometimes have institutions say, you know what, most of them don't come back, so we haven't put a process in place. But it's kind of maybe a chicken and egg thing, because if you do put a process in place, you might actually have them come back. And as Bryan is talking about, if you put a process in place and you give them a real path forward that's productive for their lives, that, here's a degree that is going to suit your needs, and maybe even the better school that suits your needs, we'll see even bigger results on this, and we won't see that 2.7%. We will see results that are much, much more productive. All right, very good. There's a question, is it possible to get the toolkit before next week? Yes, we'll send it out to the webinar participants today. So very good answer to that. And then for those of you who are going to go, please do visit the Trellis Strategies website, download the toolkit, also look at our former webinars on this topic as well as other topics. Look at the research that we've done on this topic, the technical assistance we've done on this topic. It's all there at trellisstrategies.org. All right. I believe that we are wrapping up on our questions. Bryan, any further thoughts from you before we conclude today's discussion?
So there is one more question that came in here. It said, will the new federal loan caps give re-enrollees more pause or cause confusion about whether or not they can enroll, and how can institutions combat that issue? So we do have two kind of new loan caps that are going into place that are different. One is on the graduate side, right? So your graduate and professional programs, and I think that is actually an underreported kind of some college no credential challenge that we have with graduate students. But I'll maybe defer that to a different conversation, because I think that's oftentimes a semester or two kind of closure that we need, or like a ABD kind of challenge. The Parent Plus loan caps are the other ones that we're experiencing, and for a handful of students that will cause some challenges from a financing perspective. In particular, those who are at a lot of tuition dependent privates, as well as some higher cost publics where there may be a Parent Plus loan. Depending on when loans were originated, there were individuals that might be still eligible for those higher loan limits if they re-enroll here prior to the start of 2026. But if not, there may be some challenges there. These lifetime eligibility limits, though, there's another thing that I would just call out related to that. We've had a lot of conversations recently about Workforce Pell and the opportunity that Workforce Pell raises for us to not only re-engage students, maybe with some college no credential, but to engage new learners that haven't been engaged in post-secondary education before. I think there's a lot of complexity behind Workforce Pell, including what programs are eligible, and the fact that a student might get different award letters for different programs at the same institution. But the bigger challenge is that those terms also count against lifetime eligibility limits for individuals. And so I think that there is also a conversation about what I would consider to be responsible Pell utilization, including, some of those shorter term programs. We'd have to fix lifetime eligibility. I think lifetime eligibility is an outdated concept, especially as we think about lifelong learning and nonlinear pathways that students are experiencing. But for now, we're still stuck with it. So I think on the grad and Parent Plus side, the impact is probably fairly low from, kind of re-enrolling students across the country. But there's certainly is still a lot of confusion about what these reconciliation bill changes are doing for student aid more broadly. Another question here about, do you think it's better to focus on retention and persistence rather than more on new enrollees? And Steve, more than happy to have you take that one, or I can certainly.
Yeah, it's an extremely good question, and it really depends on how your population behaves. So I'll give you an extreme example. Let's say that you're a very highly selective landmark type university that has nearly 100% retention, 100% graduation rate. New enrollments is the only way that you're going to replenish your population, because everyone stays and everyone graduates. But that's not most, that's some. What if you have a situation where you have very high attrition? In other words, lots of people leave. Lots of people don't make it from first year to second year or even further down. Lots and lots of attrition. low graduation rates, things like that. Well, then, yes, retention and persistence are going to be a more productive way to keep your population held together than new enrollment. Because two things. One, it is less expensive to keep your existing student enrolled than it is to find a new student. Two, it's also just better for your outcomes, because if you just have a revolving door, people come in, people come out, people come in, people out, you don't really graduate anybody. Nobody really gets the benefit of your degree. It's not good for the institution's, performance. So the answer really depends on the type of institution you are. And we have done lots and lots of works modeling this for institutions. So we're happy to sit down with you and look at what sort of your dynamic is, and that kind of thing. We've done that kind of work for people. But I would say that for most institutions, focus more on retention and persistence. And then the harder, more expensive thing of new recruits will take care of itself. Final thought, remember, 2025 was the largest high school graduating class in the history of America. And now it goes down. And there's going to be less and less and less and less 18-year-olds coming from high school. So adults with some college no credential, the students you already have, this is going to be your lifeline, most likely.
Yeah, and I would say too, I mean, part of this, and it's called out in the toolkit around not only kind of evaluating credits as they come in, but also thinking about credit for prior learning and other competency-based evaluations to try to increase the number of earned hours that a student has. I think some of that is rooted, back to Steve's point about the largest high school graduating class. We hear a lot about this idea of a demographic cliff that's occurring, and there is a drop in high school graduates, but we also have two other drops, right? We have a drop in the number of high school graduates that are going to college, right? So there's a lever that we can use to increase there to continue to grow enrollment. But the second is this, kind of lifelong learning and this need for continual upskilling and reskilling creates pockets of students that don't fit neatly into that FTIC sort of direct to high school component. And so I think for most institutions in the country, our hypothesis, right, or our kind of framing is that those that are most flexible and able to accept the most number of credit hours moving forward will be those that win the enrollment game longer term, because the portability of students and moving in and out of multiple institutions will become more of the norm for many, sans probably the top 150, 200 some institutions in the country. And so beginning to design those processes and thinking about, for example, with credit for prior learning and competency-based education, how we avoid having the same conversation about portability of those experiences that we're now having about transfer credit. I think those things are really important for institutions to begin to think through now on the front end.
Fantastic. Okay, any other final questions, either in the Q&A or the chat? We're looking at both. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today for this super important discussion about higher education and serving the modern learner. So important. We will, as promised, send the toolkit out to everyone who participated today, and it will be on our website, trellisstrategies.org. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and we hope to see you at our next webinar soon. Thank you.